All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday, and thank you all so much for joining us. Just to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Congresswoman Sara Jacobs' CA-53 Town Hall. My name is David Vance. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a community representative here in the district, and I'll also be your moderator this afternoon. We're very excited to have this opportunity to talk with you all, answer your questions, and share a bit about the work that Congresswoman Jacobs is doing in Washington on behalf of all of you. Before I let the Congresswoman begin the event, I want to go over some housekeeping with everyone. If you would like to ask a question, please type it into the chat. This event is also live on Facebook, so I'll be taking questions from there as well. We also have lots of questions that were sent to us ahead of time by constituents, and we'll be answering those too. To make time for as many questions as possible today, please try to keep your comments to a question. Now, without further delay, I'd like to welcome Congresswoman Sara Jacobs to the virtual stage.
Well, thank you so much, David, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this virtual town hall. I am so honored to represent all of you in Congress, and I'm excited to hear directly from you today. I appreciate you all joining on the weekend. My team and I want to make sure we're as accessible as possible. So we're hosting this today for those who may have trouble getting to a town hall in the middle of a work week. We'll continue hosting town halls at different times of day and days of the week to try and make sure they're accessible as possible. You all met David, who is our MC today and is amazing. And we have a full team in the district office who are ready and willing to help you get the support you need from the federal government. So please always feel free to reach out. It is literally our job to be your voice in Washington and on federal matters, and my team is ready to help. So please reach out. Before we get into questions, I wanted to start with just a little update on what's been happening in Washington. First, I'm very excited to share with you that on Thursday, the House passed a major appropriations bill that will include $3 million in funding for local projects for our district. So this includes $1 million for the San Diego County Child Care Expansion Fund, which is designed to help local child care providers expand so they can offer more spots. I hear from parents all the time across our district about how hard it is to access the child care they need. So I'm grateful to be able to secure funding to help address this crisis. The bill also includes $1 million for renovations for the City Heights Multimedia Idea Lab and Performance Annex at the City Heights Weingart Library, which serves the larger City Heights, Talmadge, and College area communities. It includes $500,000 for construction of an outdoor learning patio at the Linda Vista Branch Library and $500,000 in funding for ADA facility enhancements at the Balboa Park Starlight Bowl. So we passed it through the House. The legislation is now moving through the Senate, and we will continue to track it and try and make sure we get all of this important funding to our community here in San Diego. This week, I was also honored to take part in the first hearing of the Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth. This is a new committee that's been created by the House to address the rising economic inequality in our country, and it's modeled after a similar committee that President Roosevelt and Congress created during the Great Depression. I'm very honored to be one of only 8 Democrats appointed to the committee and the only freshman on the committee, and I'm looking forward to bringing the perspective of San Diegans to our work there. We hit another big milestone this month with the first advance payment of the child tax credit up to $300 per family per child each month, hitting bank accounts and mailboxes on July 15th. The expanded and improved child tax credit was one of the central components of the American Rescue Plan, which we passed back in March. And I have to say, of all the work we've done this year, the child tax credit's probably what I'm most proud of. Earlier this month, I met with families at the South Bay Family YMCA summer camp at Casillas Elementary School in Chula Vista to hear directly from them about what the child tax credit means for their families. So many of them talk not only about being able to pay rent and buy groceries, but also to start saving for their kids' college education for the first time. So in our district, nearly 85% of the kids, or more than 148,000 kids, are set to benefit from these tax credits. Eligibility depends on your income levels, but most households with children will qualify for at least a partial credit. So if you think you're eligible, but you didn't receive an advance payment last month, you can visit irs.gov, and my team will put the exact link in the chat and in the Facebook comments to confirm your eligibility. And you can also reach out to my office directly for help. We're here to help you. We'll walk you through all of the eligibility. So I know I've already talked a lot and we have a lot of questions. So I will stop here and let's get started. David, back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Congresswoman. First question, to start off, we got a lot of questions today about the federal eviction moratorium that has been in the news this week and is set to expire tonight. So we'll make this a two-part question. First, why didn't Congress extend the rental moratorium? How hard was it to stay a few extra hours or even an extra day to ensure millions of Americans aren't forced out of their homes? And secondly, what needs to be done to extend the eviction moratorium?
Well, I appreciate everyone asking this question because it's so important, and I am really worried actually about what we're going to see when the eviction moratorium expires tonight. I was actually supposed to be back in San Diego today, but I am still here in DC because we were at the Capitol late yesterday trying to get the votes together to extend the eviction moratorium. Hundreds of us missed our flights and trains home and are prepared to stay, as long as it was necessary to get it done. And, frankly, I think it's unacceptable that a handful of members refused to do the right thing and extend this moratorium. But we haven't given up on this. We're still pushing. I know leadership is working really hard to try and get the votes. I'm prepared to vote whenever we have them. And I think it's also important to say that the eviction moratorium is important in part because we know that state and local governments need more time to implement the emergency rental assistance that we passed in the American Rescue Plan. So there is money. It's just being administered by state and local governments. So if you are at risk of being evicted, if you need assistance, I strongly encourage you to contact your local elected officials on how to apply for that rental assistance. My staff will post the websites where you can apply for a rental assistance here locally in the chat and on Facebook, and also reach out to our office and we can make sure that we connect you to the right folks. So there is money available to help. Hopefully you are able to access it, and we're still pushing hard to make sure we get this eviction moratorium extended, and I'm feeling cautiously optimistic that we will be able to get something done.
Thank you, Congresswoman. As a follow-up, some folks have asked here and online, who were the members of Congress who were pushing against extending the eviction moratorium?
It's actually a good question, and I wish I knew the answer, but I don't. And so when we were waiting for the vote to come up yesterday, we were hearing that 20 members were against it. And then after a number of conversations, including members I called myself, we heard that the number dropped down to 3 or 4, but I don't know who the 3 or 4 were. So I'm hoping that they will change their mind and we will be able to get this done. In the interest of that, I don't know that it's worth naming and shaming them, even if I knew who they were, but we're still working on it.
Great, thank you. This next question came in on Instagram and they wrote, I didn't file my taxes in 2019 or 2020. Can I still receive the child tax credit?
Okay, this is a great question, and actually one of the implementation wins we got with the child tax credit. So if you didn't file your taxes, you may still be eligible for advance payments. You'll just have to complete one extra step. So the IRS has a non-filer portal on their website to register for future payments. So we will put that non-filer website in the chat and on the Facebook comments. I think we did already earlier, but we will again. And you can always check with the IRS. So there's a few things that are important. If you had a child during this year, you can file on the non-filer tool because it wouldn't have shown up in your previous tax returns, for instance. Also, only the child needs to have a social security number. So if you are an immigrant, but your child is a citizen, if you only have an ITIN number, but your child has a social security number, you should use the non-filer tool because you are still eligible to get the child tax credit. You also do not need a permanent address. So if you are housing insecure, there are other ways for you to access this. Use the non-filer tool. And another important thing, even if you don't have children, if you believe you're eligible for the economic impact payment that we passed in the American Rescue Plan, the $1,400 and $600 checks, use the non-filer tool. Even if you're not eligible for the child tax credit, but you're eligible for the economic impact payment, you will receive the economic impact payment. So if you're unsure, just go onto the IRS website or call our office and we will do what we can to help get you access to the things that you're eligible for.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Our next question, you just talked about how to apply for rental assistance. I did apply, but still haven't gotten it. Please help.
I'm so sorry to hear that. And I know that you are not the only one who is having trouble with this. Unfortunately, this is something our office has been getting a lot of calls about. So as I said, the way it works is that we pass the funding in Congress, but it's the local jurisdictions who are implementing it and getting it out the door. So call my office. We'll help connect you with your local elected officials so that they can help you with your application and check to see what the holdup is.
Great. Next question, Congresswoman. What is the status of HR 1280, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2021? And what are you doing to make sure it goes through?
So we passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act in the House earlier this year. And right now we're negotiating to try and get it through the Senate. Congresswoman Karen Bass from LA is leading the House negotiations. And on the Senate side, it's Senator Cory Booker and Senator Tim Scott. I know that they are making progress. I was talking to them the other day. There are still a few sticking points. The negotiations are not quite finished, but they do feel very positive that they'll reach a deal. And I am hopeful that they do, and I'm eager to see what it is. I know probably a lot of you have heard this year about the Senate filibuster. I personally think that it is getting in the way of a lot of progress and not in the Constitution, and that it's time to do away with it. Obviously, I'm in the House, not the Senate, so I don't actually get to decide that. But you know, the filibuster is what's currently standing in the way. So Senator Scott's a Republican, and so he's negotiating on behalf of the Republicans, working to try and see if we can get a bill that will get at least 10 Republican votes so that we can actually get it through the Senate. So that's where things are. The negotiators seem to feel like things are going in the right direction, and you know, we stand ready in the House to repass whatever they're able to get through the Senate.
Thank you. Next question, Bob H. and Brad L. asked similar questions about the national debt. Bob said, our nation is now $30 trillion in debt. How do you plan on balancing the budget and paying off our national debt? All this spending needs to be paid by someone, and it seems to me you're putting that burden on future generations. And Brad L. added, that's $227,433 per taxpayer. What are Congress's plans to address this?
Well, Bob and Brad, and I'm sure many of the rest of you have this on your mind. I appreciate the question. So as you know, I'm a millennial. I'm actually the youngest member of Congress from California. So, you know, I think a lot about the impact the decisions we're making right now have on our future. And I'm very concerned that, you know, what we're doing right now is going to impact future generations. However, I believe that the most important thing we can do is make the kinds of investments we need to make to be able to grow the economy and have an equitable economy in the future. We know interest rates are very low right now. And so actually spending the money, making the investments we need to make, rather than worrying about the debt, it seems to be what we're hearing from economists across the board. As I mentioned, I'm on the new Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth. We just had our first hearing this week, and a consistent message we heard from those economists is that the investments that we're talking about right now are so important. And, you know, in my mind, when I think about the national debt, I think I'm more concerned personally about a potential debt crisis that would happen from sluggish growth, from not making the investments we need to make right now, than any sort of issue with this. So to me, the bigger issue is not doing enough rather than doing too much. And, you know, if you talk to business owners and ask them, would you take on debt now to make investments that will grow your business later? 95% of the time they say yes, right? That's why we have a debt market, and that's what we're doing right now. Our country's in crisis, and we need to be making the investments necessary to help our families and workers and small businesses now, and to make sure we're able to grow our economy in the future. And, you know, I think it's the right thing to do from an economic standpoint. I also think it's incredibly important from a national security standpoint. When we look at global competitiveness, when we look at the rise of China, making sure that our economy is growing, that we're investing in the human capital in our country, that we're making sure that everyone, all of the best ideas are able to get into our economy. That is the most important thing we can be doing to make sure that we maintain our global competitiveness and maintain a leader on the world stage.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Our next question comes from the Zoom chat. What is the status of Medicare for All? It's my understanding that the bill went to the Ways and Means Committee. How are you working with other members to get this passed?
Well, I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of Medicare for All, and I'm in the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Medicare for All Caucus, and we have a lot of caucuses in Congress, so you'll hear me talk about all of the caucuses that I'm in. And, you know, I think it's important that we keep pushing for Medicare for All. We know it's important to expand access, and that, you know, the pandemic has really shown how important that is. Right now, we're building support among our caucus, and we have over 100 co-sponsors. I talk with Congresswoman Jacobs regularly. We're close friends, and we're figuring out when it's right to push for an actual vote. We don't want to push until we have the votes, but we're working on building consensus in the caucus, and in the meantime, pushing to make sure that in the reconciliation bill, there will be things like dental and vision added to Medicare, that we're lowering the Medicare age, increasing ACA subsidies, because we think we'll actually be able to get that done in this reconciliation package. So we're moving forward, building consensus and trying to get the wins we can where we can.
Wonderful. Next question, Congresswoman, comes from Corey G, who says, I'm very concerned about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Are you doing anything to protect the wildlife in our Arctic from oil drilling?
Well, Corey, thank you for the question, because I'm as concerned as you are. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of HR 815, the Arctic Refuge Protection Act. The bill would repeal the oil and gas program put in place by the Trump administration in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and would designate almost 1.6 million acres of land within Alaska as part of the National Wilderness Preservation System. So I'm hoping we'll get that bill through soon, and proud to co-sponsor, and thanks for all of the work you're doing to bring attention to that important issue.
Wonderful. Thank you, Congresswoman. I'm going to take a brief break from our questions to make an important announcement. You all may have heard about some of the previous competitions that our office has hosted earlier this year, such as the Congressional Art Competition or our essay contest. And I'm excited to announce our participation in the next congressional competition, the 2021 Congressional App Competition. Each year, members of Congress around the country host a coding challenge to recognize and encourage creative and innovative talent. This competition is open to all middle and high school students located in the 53rd District to participate as individuals or as a team of up to 4. The winning app will be featured on the House of Representatives official website, house.gov, as well as the Congressional App Challenge website. They will also be invited to a science fair and reception for winners from across the country. The event will be hosted in Washington, D.C. this spring. And students can create an app using any programming language on any platform, as long as they can showcase their app in a 2 to 3 minute video and then upload the video to YouTube or another video sharing platform. There will be more than one winner and other prizes. I know we're all very excited to see what everyone comes up with, and I'm sure, as was the case with our previous competitions this year, I know that our judges will have a very hard time choosing a winner. So for more information on the competition, or if you have any specific questions, please go to our website under the Services tab, or go ahead and just call our office. Our team will be posting the information in the chat here in just a moment. That being said, I want to go ahead, Congresswoman, and move on to our next question that comes from Terno M, who wants to know what's next on the immigration front.
Well, Terno, that is a great question. So I was just talking to Senator Padilla and some of the members who met with President Biden earlier this week at the White House about immigration. So first of all, I think it's important that we have a president who is so interested in pushing forward on immigration reform and is having all of these meetings about the issue with members of Congress. This is a priority for the House and for this president. So as you may know, Congress passed the Dream and Promise Act, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, and the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. And those are still priorities that are being considered in the Senate. We are also working on the American Citizenship Act, which is the comprehensive bill that Congresswoman Linda Sanchez is leading. And one of the things that we are focusing on right now and pushing really hard on is getting immigration reform into the reconciliation package. It's definitely, I think, something that is budgetary in nature. I'm hoping the parliamentarian will feel the same way. And we're going to keep pushing to get as much as we can in that reconciliation package, and then figure out what we can pass that besides that outside of the reconciliation process. So things are moving forward, and the president has made it very clear that this is a priority, and he wants us to use every lever that we have to be able to push it forward.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Eric A. Thank you for supporting the Rename the Andrew Jackson Post Office campaign. Any updates?
Well, Eric A., thank you for everything you're doing on that important topic and the leadership you've shown in pushing it forward. It's really important, and I know we've talked about it before. And since the last town hall, my office has had several conversations with Councilmember Sean Elo Rivera's office to discuss the next steps for the community input process. So we are really, really focused on making sure that there is community input throughout the process. I think it will be important that the community decides what the new name will be, and we actually can't start the legislative process till we have what we want the new name to be. So keep an eye out for an announcement from our offices soon. My staff is working with Councilmember Elo Rivera's staff on a process that will get all of your input. And one thing I should say is that part of that process will happen through our newsletter. So if you are not already signed up for our newsletter, please make sure that you do, so that you will get all the information in real time as we start that community process. And someone from my team will put how you can sign up for our newsletter in the chat, but you can also just go to our website, sarajacobs.house.gov, and it'll pop up and ask you to sign up.
Wonderful. Thank you, Congresswoman. Our next question comes from the chat. Barrett asks, why did you accept several $1,000s from a lobbying group in the country of Qatar in the Middle East and travel there? What specific benefit was this lobbying junket to our district?
So a bipartisan group of members of Congress went to Qatar at no expense to the taxpayer. And we were meeting with the government of Qatar about two main things. So the first was to talk about ways that we can have bilateral investments across the country, but I was really there focused on the bilateral investments that Qatar could make here in San Diego. They have a large sovereign wealth fund, and some of the investments they're interested in are ones I think San Diego are well placed to benefit from. And I wanted to make sure that as they were looking across the country at different places they could make those investments, that San Diego was high on their list and that we would be benefiting from the investments they want to make. The second piece, as many of you know, I sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And so part of it was conducting oversight of U.S. foreign policy and pushing forward Congress's priorities on our efforts abroad, including human rights, and speaking with other world leaders on what is important to the United States and by extension, the folks in our district. So in addition to hosting the World Cup, which, you know, we want to make sure that all of the human rights and labor rights issues have been addressed and are moving forward, Qatar is also a key player in the Middle East region. They host our largest airbase, Al Udeid, and are a key player in peace talks in Afghanistan, with the Israelis and Palestinians, with the Iranians. And so we wanted to make sure we were having conversations directly with them and really making sure that we understood what they were doing and that they understood what Congress's priorities are in some of those really important issues.
Great, thank you. Next question comes from Catalina S., who asked, do you support H.R. 82, the Social Security Fairness Act of 2021, that repeals the windfall penalty for those who work in both the public and private sector and repeals provisions that reduce Social Security benefits?
I do. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the act.
Wonderful. Excellent.
I love questions like that where I just get to say yes.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Our next question comes from Annie R., who asked, what does the Foreign Affairs Committee perceive is the biggest foreign policy concern right now? Do you agree? And can you please tell us about your appointment to work on UN peacekeeping issues in the US?
Well, thank you for the question, Annie. there are a lot of really pressing issues that we're focusing on right now. I think we're all very concerned about the protests and violence happening in Cuba, the destabilization in Haiti, the atrocities and violence taking place in Tigray and other parts of Ethiopia. One of the things that I'm really focused on is making sure we're rebuilding America's standing around the world broadly, that we're not letting each individual crisis we have to address get in the way of that broader recommitment to world leadership we need to make. And that as we're rebuilding, and especially as we're rebuilding the State Department and USAID from the devastation of the past 4 years, that we're doing them in a way that actually reflects the kinds of challenges we're facing right now and going to face in the future, and not just rebuilding the State Department we had in the 1960s. And so we're working a lot right now on how we can figure out what kinds of competencies we need those agencies to have, and then how we can build that in from Congress's side. And in terms of peacekeeping, I recently introduced legislation, the U.S. Commitment to Peacekeeping Act. It would ensure the U.S. fulfills its funding commitments to the UN, and also, in addition to just funding, directs the Biden administration to advocate for several needed reforms, including efforts that would make peacekeeping more agile, ensure accountability for human rights violations and other issues, and then make sure that they're robustly engaging with local communities. We know that peacekeeping missions work. They're 8 times cheaper for the US to support a peacekeeping mission than to deploy our own military, and have been proven to reduce conflict and violence abroad. So we're going to continue pushing on that. One thing I'm really proud of this week is that we were able to kill an amendment to the appropriations bill that would have actually reduced U.S. funding to peacekeeping missions. So we were able to make sure that didn't go through, and now we're going to push this bill to permanently end the cap on our peacekeeping contributions.
Great, thank you. Congresswoman, our next question is from Victoria M., who wrote in about an issue we have heard a lot about recently. She wrote, "When I applied for my expedited passport, I was told I'd have it in 10 weeks. Now they're saying it's going to take 12 weeks and I'm going to miss my trip. Are you doing anything to fix this mess?"
Victoria, I know this is incredibly frustrating, and while I know it doesn't help you at all, no, you're not alone. This is, David, what do you think? Probably the #1 phone call our office is getting these days?
Undoubtedly, and casework
Yes.
as well, undoubtedly.
Yes. So, we know that processing times for passports have gotten way too long. I actually joined my colleagues in sending a letter to the Secretary of State asking the State Department to find ways to reduce processing times and asking what they need from Congress to be able to do that. I'm not sure how close your trip is, but you can contact my office. And my staff can see if we might be able to help expedite your passport application. My team will put the link in the chat. And any of you who are having these issues, feel free to reach out, and just know we know how frustrating it is, and we're working to try and make sure that the State Department is able to process these as quickly as possible.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. Our next question is from Heather R., who said, "I would like to see more focus on education, making it a priority. There has been record funding this year, but how do we keep it up and not only make it one-time funds?"
That is a great question. So first of all, in case those of you didn't know, we were in the American Rescue Plan able to pass funding that goes directly to school districts to help make sure as they're reopening that they're able to address learning loss, that they can reopen safely. It's a lot of money, and I think it was incredibly important that we were able to get that done in the American Rescue Plan. But as you said, it's only short-term money. And so the question is, what can we do moving forward? So first of all, the appropriations bill that passed the House this week included a 118% increase in Title I funding. I think increasing Title I funding is one of the most important things we can do because it's funding that goes to our most low-income schools. So that's an important first step. We also increased the size of Pell Grants and increased funding for higher education, including HBCUs. I think it's important that we continue pushing for more funding for Title I schools, that we collectively work on how to make sure that funding for schools in general is more equitable. And then for us here in San Diego, we need to make sure that we're preserving and expanding the amount of impact aid that goes to school districts in need. And that's something I'm working on right now. And hopefully we'll have an announcement in the nearest future.
Wonderful. We're just a little bit past the 30-minute mark right now, so just wanted to reiterate for folks who may have joined a little bit late, if you would like to ask a question, please go ahead and type it into the chat. This event is also live on Facebook, so we're taking questions from there as well. And we also had lots of questions that were sent to us ahead of time by constituents that we are going through during this town hall as well. So thank you to everyone who is asking questions and who submitted those in advance. Congresswoman, the next question I have for you comes from JLE, who wrote, I wanted to ask for your stance on global poverty and what legislation have you supported to alleviate global poverty altogether? This is especially concerning considering how the pandemic has affected poverty even more and has reversed progress.
Well, I really appreciate the question because as you probably know, this is an issue that's very close to my heart. Prior to Congress, I worked at UNICEF and worked on childhood poverty, both here in San Diego and internationally. And you're right, I'm very concerned about what we're seeing right now. All of the studies I've seen show that the pandemic has largely erased 10 years of income gains. And for the first time since the 90s, we're seeing global poverty rates increase. So in the American Rescue Plan, we did include funding for addressing not only the pandemic abroad, but also some of the second and third order effects of the pandemic abroad. One key piece of legislation that aims to address the effects is the Global Health Security Act, which I was proud to co-sponsor. So there's two things we need, right? We need the right level of funding, which we're working on now, and through both the American Rescue Plan, this bill, and the State and Foreign Operations Appropriation Bill we just passed. That funding will hopefully be coming through, but then we need to make sure that that funding is actually as impactful as possible. So I'm right now working on a big project with my colleagues to reform the way we deliver development assistance so that we're actually centering the needs of the people on the ground, supporting local groups, and making sure that our efforts are as sustainable as possible.
Thank you. Congresswoman, our next question comes from the Zoom chat. Ellen asks, as we make these investments from the Innovation and Competition Act, as well as dollars directed at infrastructure, how do we ensure the money is spent wisely? Where can we as citizens help the process?
It's a good question. So the Senate passed the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. It actually hasn't passed the House yet, and the House, I'm working with my colleagues on making some substantial changes to it. So it's not exactly where it will be when it finally gets passed. As you know, one of my passions is working on how we can get more people involved in the policymaking process, which includes looking at things like participatory budgeting, so we can make sure that you all are actually included in how we're making budgeting decisions. It's why we're also working on this big reconciliation bill that will include infrastructure and so much more. And one of the things we're making progress on through the INVEST Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill is pushing for more funding for traditionally underserved communities and the high impact projects that those communities need.
Thank you. Next question comes also from Zoom, and it's from Joaquin. He writes, hello, Congresswoman. Are you familiar with the Philippine president's human rights violations and over 30,000 extrajudicial killings following his anti-terror law? What is your stance on the Philippine Human Rights Act?
So I'm familiar with the gross human rights violations in the Philippines. I'm extremely concerned about it. I'm particularly concerned about it in relation to the U.S. security assistance that is being provided to the government. I don't know that I know all the details of that specific bill. My staff will look into it, but we take this issue very seriously and are really working very hard to make sure that all U.S. assistance that the United States provides, make sure that governments are upholding human rights and are not violating the rights of their own people. In fact, actually just this week, I introduced an amendment to the appropriations bill. It didn't pass, but we're working on it, maybe next year, that would have established human rights conditions on all foreign military financing to all countries. So it's something we're tracking closely and are working hard on, and I'll make sure my team looks into that specific piece of legislation.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you again to everyone for submitting such fantastic questions. And again, thank you all for being here with us this afternoon. Another brief break from questions just to make another announcement on behalf of our office. I'm happy to announce an upcoming grants workshop event that our office is hosting with Congressman Scott Peters on August 3rd from 3 to 4 p.m. Our two offices will be holding a live virtual grants workshop and providing grant seekers with information on how to apply for grants and find funding opportunities, and share how our offices can help you in your search. This event is a good fit for nonprofits seeking federal grants to grow their organizations. We'll feature prominent speakers who have years of experience in the grants process and who will share advice on how to succeed in applying for federal funding. So go ahead and please share this event with anyone who you know is interested in the grants application process. Again, we'll be holding it Tuesday, August 3rd at 3 p.m. The registration link will be posted in the chat. And if you have any questions about the event, please feel free to reach out. My colleague Jane's contact information is posted in the chat. Thanks so much. And rolling right ahead, Congresswoman, with our next question. This came in from Zoom, but it looks like we have this question come in from a few different platforms. Folks have been asking about Ethiopia. Since you sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee, can you comment on what is happening in Ethiopia right now?
Yeah. I have been really heartbroken about the violence and atrocities and humanitarian disaster taking place in Tigray and other parts of Ethiopia, including Amhara, Afar, Benishangul Gumuz, Oromia, and elsewhere. Truthfully, I've been sitting in many briefings and hearings with the State Department, pushing to make sure we're doing as much as we can to address these atrocities, because the atrocities and violence are truly sickening. The accounts I've heard of sexual and gender-based violence and the human-inflicted famine in Tigray is unimaginable. So I'm receiving weekly updates from the ground in the State Department. We're, taking that information very seriously. And I think it's important to say that I urge all parties to immediately cease hostilities and come to the negotiating table for a lasting, durable solution. And I condemn all parties on all sides that are committing atrocities and destabilizing the region. We've heard reports of child soldiers by all parties on social media. And while we're unable to confirm these reports, my staff is looking into them, and I condemn any party who's using child soldiers in this conflict. The scale of the humanitarian crisis it's absolutely unacceptable.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next question. Noreen C. asked about how we are holding elected officials accountable for January 6th.
So, Noreen, I appreciate the question. As you may know, I was in the House gallery on January 6th. I was sitting on the balcony that overlooks the House floor. They don't normally have members of Congress there, so they didn't have an evacuation plan, and we basically got trapped. We could hear the mob, the insurrectionists right there. It was very scary. So holding the perpetrators accountable is personal, but I don't think it's important only because of how it personally impacted me. As you know, my background is in working in conflict. And I know that when you look at instances of this kinds of violence in countries around the world, if you don't have accountability the first time something like this happens, you're much more likely to get future violence. So I think it's incredibly important. So we had the first hearing of the House Select Committee on the January 6th attack this week. You may have read some news about how Minority Leader McCarthy revoked his Republican appointees to the committee, but Congresswoman Liz Cheney and Congressman Adam Kinzinger are both still serving on it. And, I'm feeling confident that Chairman Benny Thompson will work to make sure that we find the truth about what happened. And I'm very grateful to the 4 police officers who testified about what happened to each of them that day. I think it was important for America to hear that. And I know it's just the first of many hearings that they're going to have to try and get to the bottom of what happened.
Thank you. Next question, Congresswoman, comes from Patricia B., who wants to know, what is the single most important issue Congress is facing now or in the near future, and what is your position on this issue?
It's a great question. The most important issue facing Congress right now. Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Last month, Speaker Pelosi appointed me to the new House Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth. I actually think addressing economic inequality is the most pressing issue of our time. And for me, I'm especially focused on how that inequality affects children. We can't, I hear from families all the time about how the situation that we saw in the pandemic just exacerbated what was already an untenable situation, and that for too many families, going back to normal just is not an option. It was not working. And so I think for our families, for our future, and also, as I mentioned, for our global competitiveness, getting our economic inequality under a hold, making sure we're investing in children and making sure every child here has opportunities and is able to recognize their full potential is probably the most important issue that we're facing for our future.
Thank you. Next question comes from Christopher G., who wrote, California and your district can't be complacent about voting rights. The changes underway across the nation will reduce the progress made in our state if Congress fails to strengthen voting rights for all. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. I mean, it's why the House has made voting rights and strengthening our top priority this year by passing H.R. 1. We're also working on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, H.R. 4. Basically, the difference between the two bills, H.R. 1 is really meant to address what is currently happening and able to fix some things that have happened. H.R. 4 is looking at the future and fixing what the Supreme Court gutted in the original Voting Rights Act, so we can make sure these new bills won't get passed in the future. So, I think that we need both because we've seen bills pass state legislatures all across the country intent on restricting the right to vote. We need to fix those and make sure they can't happen in the future. And that's what H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 would do. So basically where we are right now is that we are working with the Senate on negotiating what might be able to get through the Senate. I think, again, as I mentioned, this is an issue where the filibuster is getting in the way of progress and is time to repeal it. But we're working closely with the White House and the Senate to figure out what we can do to move forward because this is really an issue about our democracy and the future of it. And I think it's incredibly important.
Thank you. Our next question is from Francine, who wrote, I've spoken to neighbors and they're asking why the Congresswoman isn't present when she is in town. She hasn't gone to Black celebrations and we don't see her plans for Black specific small businesses in the rescue plan.
Well, thank you for the question. My staff and I are always looking for opportunities to hear from constituents at community events. And I know Coral, one of my community representatives here in the district office, regularly attends community planning meetings in Skyline and Paradise Hills and the greater Golden Hill area. I really try and be everywhere. And when I'm in town, I try and go to as many things as possible. And my team attends events on my behalf when I'm in DC, but we can't know everything. We can't be everywhere. So if you hear or know of an event that you think it's important for us to be at, please invite us. One of the honors I get as a member of Congress is to honor and celebrate those of you doing amazing work in the community. So call my office. Please let me know when you're having things. I will try my very best to come. If not, someone from my team will try and come. And please send us those invitations. Even if you think we already know about it, we might not. As for your questions about the Black-owned small businesses and support from the American Rescue Plan, actually, my Democratic colleagues in the San Diego delegation and I did a forum with BAPAC San Diego to talk through in detail the resources available to San Diego's Black community and Black-owned businesses through the American Rescue Plan. So we'll make sure to send you that recording that you can share with your network. And my team will put in the chat email addresses and information for how you can make sure you get invitations to community events to our team. But please invite us. I love seeing you all. I really try and be everywhere when I'm home, and I will try and be even more everywhere.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next question comes from John H., who asked, is the political polarization in the House as bad as it is being portrayed in the media? Is it better or worse than you anticipated as a newly elected representative, and what can be done to fix it?
It's a really good question, John. And I guess the answer unsatisfactorily is yes and no. So yes, a lot of the fights we're having are very real. How you handle the investigation into January 6th. What we can do on voting rights and LGBTQ plus rights and gun violence prevention, the American Rescue Plan, even with popular things like expanded paycheck protection program, the child tax credit passed without a single Republican vote. So, there are big fights that we're having, and there is a lot of tension. And, I think a lot of us are trying to figure out how to continue making progress for the American people, but also hold accountable the folks who we feel are really getting in the way of our democracy. However, it's not all bad. Actually, I sit on two committees, the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Armed Services Committee, that have historically been some of the most bipartisan committees. And so while we all bring our priorities, there's actually quite a lot that happen in that committee that really does have bipartisan support. I've co-led a number of bills with Congresswoman Stephanie Bice, a Republican from Oklahoma, and we have a lot of shared priorities around childcare and housing and support for military families. I've been on multiple bipartisan CODELs and have had the chance to travel with Republican members. And, while there are times we don't agree on things, we get to know each other as humans and try and figure out what legislation we might be able to work together on. So I know it feels like all we do in Congress is fight, and I think there are some areas where we have to draw a line and we can never compromise, but there are also a lot going on behind the scenes, working to make sure we find ways to work together to move things forward.
Thanks, Congresswoman. I'm going to take another brief break from questions just to make another announcement. I'm happy to announce that our Military Service Academy application is now live on our website. Each year, members of Congress are able to nominate outstanding high school seniors to the 5 military academies: Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marine. The application is open now until November 1st, 2021. The original completed application packet, which can be found on our website, must be postmarked by October 25th or personally delivered to our office by November 1st to be considered. It's open to all high school seniors in the 53rd District. If you have questions about the application process, please reach out to my colleague Coral. Her contact information is posted in the chat. All right, Congresswoman, and we will go ahead and move on with our next question. This next question actually came in from Instagram, which is great to see so many folks engaging us on Instagram and Facebook and social media and everywhere else. So again, thank you to everyone for taking the time to send us your questions in today. So this question that came in from Instagram, Congresswoman, what's going on with the reconciliation bill? What do you want in it?
That is a great question, and the question of the hour. So basically what's going on is that the Senate is working on passing the initial budget resolution. That resolution will include instructions to each of the relevant committees that will then work within their area of jurisdiction to craft the legislative text. Then it will all get put back together, and then we'll vote on the final package. So right now, what we're negotiating on is what instructions are going to be sent to the different committees. That includes the top line number of the budget, but then also how much money is being delineated for each different area of jurisdiction and each different area that we're trying to work on. So my big focus is making sure that we get our investments in the care economy in the reconciliation bill. So many people right now are focusing on making sure we get climate change into reconciliation, since we know not enough of it is in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I think that's really important. And I'm pushing to make sure we get the expanded child tax credit, we get investments in childcare, in universal pre-K, and that they're big enough in those reconciliation instructions that will then go to the committees of jurisdiction. So that is my main priority right now. If you have thoughts on what you want to see in the bill, if you have things you think aren't being thought about enough or talked about enough, please let our office know, because we are in the midst of those negotiations right now.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And another question, I know this is, again, a very, very important and very timely topic. This question came in from Facebook. I joined a little bit late and missed what you said about the eviction moratorium, if you talked about it. I'm desperate for an update, please.
Well, so the update is that we tried really hard to get it passed last night. It's why I'm still in Washington, D.C. right now. There were a handful of folks who refused to vote for it, which is why we weren't able to get it passed, but we haven't given up hope. We're still working. I know leadership is still working to try and get those final votes, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get something done soon. In the meantime, there are rental assistance programs available to help. They go through your local jurisdiction. So depending where you are, the city you live in or the county of San Diego, if you don't know where to look for help, call our office. We will help put you in touch with the right people to hopefully be able to get you access to those rental assistance programs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Congresswoman. And thank you again for all the questions. We are almost at the end of our time here. We've got about 8 minutes left. So because we are getting pretty close to the end here, I do want to give folks the opportunity to ask the Congresswoman a live question over Zoom. So if you would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function on your Zoom screen and wait for me to call on you. We will then unmute you and you may ask your question. And again, we're running tight on time here and we want to get through maybe 1 or 2 questions if we can. So please try to keep your question concise. All right, and it looks like we have a question from Joaquin. Joaquin, if we can go ahead and unmute you.
Hello, Congresswoman. Thank you again for letting me be here. So following up about my previous question on the Philippine Human Rights Act, just a quick summary of the bill. It would temporarily suspend military aid to the country until members of the police and military who are responsible for the extrajudicial killings are prosecuted. And I was wondering if you have any further thoughts on this so far, and if you're willing to move it through the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Well, I appreciate the question, Joaquin, and thank you for all of your advocacy on this important issue. It's really important, and I'm grateful for everything you're doing. I think you'll hopefully be happy that your member of Congress will not sign on to bills until we've gotten a chance to look at the actual legislative text and make sure that we understand all of the implications. So I don't want to give you an answer right now, but I will promise you that my team and I will look into it, and we can follow up with you when we've gotten the time to actually look through the legislative text and make sure there's nothing that we have any issues with. But in principle, I'm very in favor of making sure that we are including human rights constraints in any assistance that we give.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we have another hand from Vasquez Joaquin.
Hi, yeah. So you touched on the evictions moratorium and what you've been doing so far. There's other avenues that have been brought up by other congresspersons, especially Congresswoman Cori Bush, that's on the steps of the Capitol building as we speak. Are there any of those that you're considering either pressuring the Senate, pressuring the administration on making sure that the evictions moratorium is actually extended? And if not, what will happen if that doesn't happen? What is it going to look like, and what are you preparing to do?
So I'm, working closely with my colleagues in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, including Cori Bush, who's a good friend of mine, trying to figure out the best way to actually be able to get a vote on this issue and make sure that we get it passed. I am talking to members who, may have concerns with it, who, trying to figure out what might be possible to get passed. So we're pushing hard. We're pushing hard on the White House to try and pass, do an executive order themselves, although obviously we know the Supreme Court has already said that they will not really allow that to go through. So we're working hard to get something done. I'm feeling optimistic that we'll be able to, and I'm very concerned about what might happen if it doesn't go through. I know, Joaquin, that you're doing a lot of work with folks who will be directly impacted. We're trying to make sure people know how to access the rental assistance money that we were able to pass in the American Rescue Plan. Also making sure folks know that the child tax credit is available to them even without a permanent address. So hopefully we can try and get as much help to folks as possible, but we are working hard to get this eviction moratorium passed.
Thank you. And we only have just a couple of minutes left here, so my apologies that we're not going to get the chance to answer everyone's live questions, but there is one more pre-submitted question for you, Congresswoman. And the question is, I'm really concerned about what's happening in Cuba. Do you believe that the trade embargo should be lifted? Do you support communism?
Well, I definitely don't support communism, and I condemn the Cuban government and their actions of violence against protesters in Cuba who are using their voice to speak out. I think it's important that the United States stands with the people of Cuba in this fight after years of repression and economic turmoil. And at the same time, I think it's important that we acknowledge the role that the United States policy and the U.S. embargo has played in the economic suffering of everyday people in Cuba. And I've called on the Biden administration to roll back Trump-era sanctions and provide additional assistance to the Cuban people, and I will continue to do so.
Great. Thank you so much again to everyone for your questions and for taking the time out of your busy weekend, Saturday afternoons to come and spend some time and chat with us. It's been great to hear from you, and for Congresswoman Jacobs to have the opportunity to share some important updates with you all. I know we've left some contact information in the chat, but just wanted to remind folks how to get in touch with our office. You can call our district office at 619-280-5353. If you're having an issue with a federal agency like the IRS, VA, Social Security, any others, our office may be able to help. You can request help with a federal agency through our website by clicking on the Services tab and then clicking Help with a Federal Agency, or you can just call us at the number I provided just a minute ago. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Rep Sara Jacobs. So if you're not following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, make sure you look up at Rep Sara Jacobs and give us a follow. So thank you again, everyone, to your questions and for your time. Congresswoman, I'd like to give you the floor to make any closing remarks before we sign off.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you all again for being here today. I really enjoyed hearing from all of you directly, and I appreciate you taking an hour out of your Saturday afternoon to hear from me and talk to my team and I about what you're thinking about. So as David mentioned, please reach out to our office if you ever need anything. You can reach our San Diego office at 619-280-5353 and our Washington, D.C. office at 202-225-2040. Our literal job is to help make sure you're getting what you need from the federal government. So please reach out if we can ever help you. And also please reach out if there are issues that you're seeing in our community that you think we don't know about. I've got 750,000 constituents. I really try and be everywhere all the time. Many of you know that, but it's always helpful to have community leaders like you all make sure that we're tracking the events we should be at, make sure that we are looking at all of the different issues that are affecting people. So please do reach out. We love hearing from you. I love hearing from you. And I will look forward to hopefully being back in San Diego with you all very soon. So thank you all again so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good weekend.